It is the weekend, and we are headed down to what just might be my favorite part of the entire state of Utah. Now, this area specifically is awesome for drone photography, probably one of the most popular places in the entire world now for drone photographers, for aerial photography, for video. It's pretty much become like the go-to place because there's so many cool abstracts there. So we got the drone here. We're going to be bringing the DJI Mavic 3, which is my favorite drone by far, and we're going to see what kind of images we can get this crazy place. Now, this area is also incredible for astrophotography, so we're going to be getting some images of the Milky Way while we're down there as well. Now, for our first night of camping, we're going to go to one of my absolute favorite places in the entire state of Utah, one of the most bizarre places that I know of. We're going to be camping on the edge of Moonscape Overlook. Now, Moonscape Overlook is not its actual official name, but it's a name that people started calling it as it started to gain popularity, and the name has just stuck. And when I first started going to this area sometime back in 2016, it seemed that no one really knew the names of these places, and they really weren't that well known. Well, thanks to social media, these places have quickly blown up, and they're very popular now, with a lot of people going there, photographing different landscapes, doing lots of different drone shots. So it's very, very popular now, where it really wasn't not that long ago. Now, the reason why people say this place looks like the moon is primarily because of a type of terrain called Mancos Shale. Mancos Shale is what makes up this super bizarre gray-colored Badlands, which really does look like something you would see on the surface of the moon. Now, Mancos Shale is actually a type of ultra-fine dried marine mud after the lake that was here left many millions of years ago. Now, when the sun actually comes all the way up and starts to strike these Badlands, you can see in the broad daylight, they're really just kind of sort of this weird gray color. And that weird gray color has just a little bit of a blue tint to it, but that makes it kind of the perfect color to just inherit whatever type of sunlight is striking it, and it makes it look that blue or orange when those colors are striking the surface of them. Now, one of the things that adds to the bizarre look of this area is that absolutely no plants or vegetation will grow on Mancos Shale. There's actually a very good reason for that. The Mancos Shale clay itself actually suffocates roots. So whenever the weather changes, it rains, basically, this Mancos Shale will absorb the water and swell, and then as it dries, it shrinks and hardens like a concrete or a clay. That makes it impossible for any kind of normal plant life to grow here, which adds to this bizarre look of looking like, some other planet, the surface of the moon or some other world. It doesn't look earthly because nothing can grow there. This bizarre combination of these very dark gray or sometimes even black looking areas of Mancos Shale, in addition to no vegetation being able to grow there, really add to this place having this very wicked, sinister look. This obviously makes for some very interesting landscape photos because the terrain is so bizarre, and that's honestly one of my favorite things about this place, is all of the weird dark blacks and dark colors that you get here, dark grays, which make it look kind of evil or sinister or wicked in kind of a bizarre way. Now, for our first night of camping, we are going to be camping right here up against the edge of Moonscape Overlook, but it is really important for you to know that if you ever decide to go there, this place is not a safe place to go. It's especially not a safe place to go with children or with pets because the edge of this cliff face is completely exposed. There is no guardrail, there's nothing stopping you from driving off the edge or walking off the edge, and so for that reason, I've been hesitant to publish much about this place for a very long time. This cliff face itself is roughly 800 to 1,000 feet down, and it's just nothing but solid rock. So there's really no good chances of you having a good outcome if you fall off the edge of this cliff or if the ground were to give out from underneath you. Now, what really makes this place most dangerous is the fact that this type of terrain is sort of like a hardened mud. You can think of it like a dirt clod or like a sand clod. The second that you put any kind of pressure on it, it actually crumbles and collapses. In fact, not that long ago, back in 2024, a 19-year-old boy actually did fall off the edge of this cliff while taking photos, and unfortunately he died. Very tragic story. He was 19 years old. His name was Jonathan Fielding, and he was just a little little bit too close to the edge of this rim. And it's just one of those things where there's really nothing that you could do to know that this would be an unsafe piece of ground. Any piece of ground along the edge of this cliff face could be unstable and could collapse underneath of you. Now, unfortunately, in this case, he just got a little bit too close to this edge and the ground did collapse out from underneath of him and he did fall, and unfortunately, he was killed from the fall. This is something I feel like I have to warn people about whenever I talk about this place, just because it's very, very hard to understand unless you've been there and you've seen this type of terrain. At really any one of these points where you can stand on the edge of this cliff face, the ground is not stable. It's just sort of a dried mud. And at any point, it could crumble and collapse and give out from underneath of you. And it's like an 800 to 1,000 foot drop down to the bottom. So very, very dangerous place to be if you're not careful and you don't know what you're doing. For this trip specifically, I am trying to get a full Milky Way panorama over Moonscape Overlook, as well as some really bizarre sort of aerial images and telephoto images of that basin at the bottom of Moonscape Overlook with my drone and with my telephoto camera at sunrise, right when the first light from twilight starts to strike it, and then again when the sunlight itself actually starts to strike these Badlands. Now, Moonscape Overlook is very convenient because you can camp right here on the edge of the cliff face in your car, which is much better than some of the other locations I like to shoot astro, where you have to camp somewhere else and then wake up and drive like an hour or so in order to get the shot. So this allows me to get like 1, 2, maybe 3 hours of sleep before the Milky Way comes up. Wake up, get out, shoot the Milky Way for a little while, and then get back into bed. This is where my car camping setup in the back of my 4Runner comes in super handy. This is the Luno air mattress, which is designed specifically to fit the back of the 4Runner. It is nice at a location like this to be away from the elements inside of a locked car, especially here where there can be a lot of wind at night. So we ended up getting lucky with the conditions for the Milky Way that night. I got up and I managed to get this full Milky Way panorama. Taken on the Nikon D850 with the Tamron 15-30 at 15mm. My camera settings for the original single exposure panorama were 20-second exposures at f2.8, 15mm at ISO 12800. I then turned on my star tracker and adjusted my camera settings in order to get a much cleaner, longer exposure of the night sky itself, which would give me no star trailing with less image noise. For this, I adjusted my ISO down to ISO 800. I kept my aperture at f2.8, but I shot 8-minute exposures tracked. Once my full Milky Way panorama of 5 images was complete for the sky, I turned my star tracker back off, and then I shot my foreground panorama at the exact same settings. I then combined all of these images in post to give me this final result you see here. I was really, really happy with the final result of this image. This is an image that I'd wanted to shoot for many, many years, and I'd been to this location for many, many years before, so I kind of knew exactly what I wanted to do for this panorama. The only thing that I had wished I'd gotten was a person standing out on this infamous little rock that kind of jets out from the cliff face, but I didn't know how to pull that off with my long exposure, 8-minute foreground. I just didn't know how to get someone solid there. And I didn't really feel like trying to hold still for 8 minutes and go out there myself and, set up a time lapse to try and pull it off. It just didn't seem like a feasible thing. I was tired, it was cold, it was dark, I didn't want to do it by myself. But maybe sometime in the future, I'll go back out there with a little bit of help and I can get the same panorama with a person actually standing out here on this formation. Definitely a bucket list shot for me. Now, I was really, really happy with the way this final image turned out. It did take a lot of time to assemble all of the pieces of the panorama, but I think it was 100% worth it. There's just something really magical about the quality you can get from really long exposures tracked of the night sky. Now, there actually is quite a bit of light pollution on the horizon in this area, just in specific spots here you can see there in the image itself. One of those clusters is a nearby town. There's also a light from a local airport, small airstrip that's there, you can see in the distance, and then quite a bit of light pollution on the horizon as well. Now, we got really lucky this night, and there's actually quite a bit of airglow as well, which is a really strange phenomenon that looks like the northern lights, but it's not actually the northern lights itself. It's just a phenomenon known as airglow, and for whatever reason, whenever I go to this area of Utah, I tend to get a lot of airglow in my images. This area is actually where I spent a lot of my time as an early photographer learning how to photograph the Milky Way, and pretty much every one of my first RAWs that I captured all the way back in 2016 has a lot of airglow. I already know a lot of you are going to ask in the comments, how is it possible to get so much color in the night sky in this image? And that's a long answer, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as I can. A lot of different steps go into it, and post-processing is definitely a large part of it. I actually have an online course called the Milky Way Masterclass that I teach online with different videos that show how I capture and edit these images, and it's a series of hundreds of different little videos where I go through each individual step. So I'm going to drop a link to that down there in the description. It is a paid online course with a lifetime membership where I do teach every technique that I know about photographing the Milky Way, from single exposures to shooting panoramas to shooting with a star tracker to stacking, compositing, blending, all of those different types of astrophotography that I've been doing for the last 10 years I cover in this course. But a couple really important things that help a lot to getting better Milky Way images are, first of all, using a lens with a fast aperture. Now this is actually done with the Tamron 15-30 at f2.8, but if you can get a lens that goes down to f1.8 or even f1.4, it's gonna make a world of difference. Every stop that you go down, you're able to collect more light. It just gives you so many more options, and it makes it so much easier to capture images like this. So back in the day when I captured this image, this is actually taken several years ago, I only had the Tamron 15-30, which was a 2.8 lens. I now have the Sony G Master 14mm 1.8, and that is a much, much better lens for astrophotography in every way, shape, and form. I think that lens absolutely tops the Tamron 15-30 in every possible way. Now, honestly, one of my favorite cameras there is for capturing astrophotos is the Sony a7R5. I think that camera is incredible, as well as the Nikon Z8. They both perform very, very well in low light. Here's actually a single exposure that was taken on the Sony a7R5 at white pocket with the Sony G Master 14mm 1.8. It's very rare to be able to take a single exposure and have this much dynamic range, be able to have sharp stars, be able to have that much color. So I can definitely vouch for the fact that that combo, the Sony a7R5 and the Sony 14mm G Master 1.8, is an absolutely amazing combo for shooting the Milky Way, especially if you're trying specifically to just shoot single exposures. Of course, after capturing this panorama, I only had a few hours to go back to bed in the back of the 4Runner before it was time to get up again and get sunrise. And this place specifically is one of my favorite places to shoot the early morning light before the sun actually comes up. This time of day is known as blue hour or twilight. It's when only blue light is coming around the horizon. The sun hasn't quite crested the horizon, isn't quite shining on the ground just yet. And the bottom of this basin has some of the most bizarre extraterrestrial looking surfaces I have ever seen in my life. Some of these surfaces are so bizarre. There's these huge cracks and these rifts. It really does look like the surface of the moon. And when you're able to capture them with that really bizarre early morning blue light, it really adds to how bizarre and strange these places look. I was able to capture this image, one of my favorite images captured of this basin here, one of the most bizarre places I've ever seen, and this image. These are two of my favorite images I've ever captured. These were taken with a telephoto lens, just looking down into that basin, and gave me some of the most unique perspectives I think I've ever seen of strange terrain. This is looking down at this huge area here. You almost can't tell what it is in these images, which I absolutely love. So here's the spot where we've got the tripod set up. You can kind of see this rock. It's a little bit detached from the rest of this cliff face. Now, I've been coming out here since 2017, and this has always been roughly the same, so it's not changing that frequently. But there are pieces of this that collapse and fall down into that basin from time to time. Now, I know I'm kind of setting a bad example here where I talk about how dangerous this place is and how I really wouldn't recommend doing this. I still do not recommend doing this. I don't think anyone should do this unless you have some experience, but I wanted to go out there and I wanted to experience what it was like to stand in this formation. Doing it is pretty scary. I mean, it's kind of a drop off on pretty much every direction, both sides basically. You've pretty much just got a sheer drop off. And again, this formation is not super stable. The terrain itself is kind of like that dried mud that just crumbles and gives way. So again, you know, it was cool to get it on video here so you guys can see it, but also probably not the smartest thing to do. So this spot I'm on right now is a pretty famous specific spot people hike out to get this shot, usually with the drone. You can see the mountain behind them. Sunrise is usually the best time to get this, kind of get that golden light striking this cliff face. Now, after spending the morning here at Moonscape Overlook, taking in some of the views, getting some good drone images, some drone photos, some photos of the basin here at the bottom of Moonscape Overlook, and of course exploring the area itself, it was time to move on to some of my other favorite areas here of this particular part of Utah, explore some of these Badlands, and drive some of my favorite roads out here. Now, one of my favorite roads in this entire area will actually take us from this upper basin where we have the Butte and Moonscape Overlook down into that lower basin that you can see from the top of the overlook. And one of the coolest parts of this entire road is when it reaches this sort of shelf where it is actually dropping you down into that basin. It's not super steep or a huge drop off like you get over at Moonscape, but you do get to drive down a little bit of a switchback that just slowly take you down into that basin. The scale and the size and just the view from this point is actually really hard to describe or even show on camera. Now, this road really isn't that challenging or hard to do, but there are a couple spots where you probably want four-wheel drive or at least just a little bit of higher clearance. I have done this road several times in the past in low clearance vehicles that don't have four-wheel drive, but I really wouldn't recommend that for the most part. Now, this first little section of the road is going to take us through more of this Mancos Shale and drop us down into this lower basin before taking us a little bit closer to some of these really bizarre red hills and different cliffs, and at one point there's even a water crossing which can be low or high just depending on how much water and runoff there is that year. Now, for me, being able to go down on a Friday night and spend all day Saturday and then drive back immediately Sunday morning, usually I spend most of Saturday itself scouting out for the location I want to photograph Saturday night. Now, once you reach sort of the bottom of this little valley and you're winding through some of these roads, there's actually this old abandoned, what looks like a house. I assume this is someone's homestead from some time back in, I don't know, maybe the 1800s, but I really have no idea. So if you do know what this building is, let us know down there in the comments below. I really have no idea what it is, but you can tell it's very old and it looks like maybe someone lived here at one point a really long time ago and the ruins have just been left behind and semi-preserved. It's really interesting to see how good of shape this little house thing, this little shack is. It's not totally destroyed, it's pretty much untouched. There's no sign, there's no plaque. It looks like maybe they had some farmland at one point or another. So we explored that for a little while before we started making our way back up the mesa, because this time I had a plan for where I wanted to shoot sunset that night. In this case, I had some very specific drone shots in mind that I wanted to get of the butte itself with some of that nice golden hour sunset lighting, so I decided to perch up along the road near the top of that shelf that we were driving in order to get some really interesting aerial images and videos of the butte and some of these crazy textures. Now, during this really intense sunset golden hour lighting, I was able to get a couple of images that I think just really turned out awesome, and here are a few of my favorites. It's really crazy just the sheer scale of this place. Now, for this sunset, I was able to get some of the coolest abstract aerial images, some of my favorite images that I've ever captured down here in this area. There's so many different ways you can capture the abstracts. And what's really interesting about the abstracts is just the sheer scale, where someone might not really understand just how huge the area this image encompasses is. This area is massive. I mean, a vehicle or a person would be so small that you almost couldn't even see them in a lot of these angles. One of my absolute favorites that I was able to get is this one, where I was able to show the length of the shadows. And the shadow length here is crazy. People don't realize this shadow is massive. It just goes on for thousands and thousands and thousands of feet. It's huge. And so really not being able to understand that sense of scale, how big that shadow is, without some kind of reference scale is just crazy being able to see it in person. Actually see how big that shadow is being casted just because the light is so low and it's hitting one of those huge ridges and casting that massive shadow all the way across this vast set of Badlands. And this time I was too tired after the previous night capturing Milky Way images for most of the night that I realized I'm not going to be able to shoot the Milky Way again. I'm just going to need to sleep so that I can drive Sunday morning back up to my home in Salt Lake City, Utah. So we set up camp for the night. I was able to capture this time lapse really quickly of our campsite Saturday night before we got up Sunday morning and started our drive back to northern Utah. Now, with it being Sunday morning, it's time to start the drive back up to northern Utah. We just have to make one more quick stop, and that's going to be at the Hole in the Rock gas station, which is a really interesting gas station that quite literally is built into the side of this massive rock. It really is a hole in the rock. As a matter of fact, when you walk through the gas station, you can actually see the surface of the rock making up the walls. This is in the town of Hanksville, Utah. Super bizarre. So if you ever get the chance, make sure to stop at this Hole in the Rock gas station. One of the weirdest things I think you can see here in the state of Utah. Now, this video is actually my second video of this part of southern Utah. If you want to see the previous video that I did about this part of Utah, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link down there in the description, as well as show it on screen right here if you guys want to check out that video. That was a trip that I did with a couple buddies of mine, Tyler and Stetson. And of course, if you guys want to see more videos of all of these crazy places here in Utah, I have a channel where I pretty much explore some of the lesser known, now some of the more known popular, but some of the strangest and most interesting geological areas for landscape photography around the state of Utah. Now, if you guys want to check out some of the images that I captured from this trip and others of this area, I'll drop a link down there in the description to my Wicked Lands gallery, which is a gallery of images specifically from this place over the many different years I've been going there. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to drop a link to some of the other videos I have of similar interesting areas in Utah down there below as well if you guys want to check them out. And I'll see you guys in the next video.